The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 104 Prisoners and Paranoia. Draco had not been able to meet Luna's eyes since a few moments after he'd apparated into the Malfoy cellars with Pym. He struggled to maintain his composure. What the absolute fuck was she doing here? Why did they bring her here? She was a pureblood, a relative of theirs, for God's sake.
"If you're wondering why I'm here, I think it has to do with Daddy," Luna mused, in a voice that was entirely reminiscent of her Quidditch commentating. "He's been publishing a lot of things that you-know-who doesn't care for. I think maybe they thought that Daddy would stop publishing those things if I didn't come home for Christmas."
"Luna, fuck, I've got to get you out of here. Come on, perhaps Pym can take you—"
"No, Draco. If I leave, they may kill your elf, or you, or even Mr. Ollivander. It's okay. It's actually quite comfortable here, even if it's a bit dark. Luckily, when Mr. Ollivander feels well, he can conjure a bit of light wandlessly. We don't use it very often because it weakens him, but when we need it, we have it. And your elves have been quite kind. We rather enjoyed the Christmas goose, in fact."
Draco was struck dumb again. Not only had he not known that Luna Lovegood was living in his cellar, but apparently the elves had made goose for Christmas and served it to the prisoners. Draco had the wild thought they would have much preferred to have Christmas dinner with Luna and Ollivander in the cellar than with everyone upstairs.
"Can you do me a small favour, though? Can you let Blaze know that I'm all right? I know he's going to be worried when he goes back to school and I'm not there."
"I have a coin." Draco dug the B coin from his pocket. With Blaze at school with him, it wasn't as necessary now, and he could make another. He told her how to use it, and she thanked him with a hug. Draco held on a bit longer. This cousin, this witch, who had done nothing wrong, was stuck here in part because of his poor decisions. Draco felt a deep pang of guilt. Perhaps if he had tried to kill Lord Voldemort when they first met, when the Dark Lord had been weaker. Bellatrix, of course, was waiting in the wings to take over for him, but she seemed far more human than the Dark Lord. Something about him seemed almost unkillable, and Hermione had as much confirmed that when she talked about this search and the prophecy. "I'll come down again as soon as I can," he said. Darkness was falling fast outside, and dinner would be served upstairs shortly. If he were missing on Christmas Day, it would seem odd.
"We will be here, young Malfoy,"
Ollivander intoned.
"In the meantime, Miss Lovegood and I shall continue our discussion of wand trees."
The old, wizened wizard smiled kindly at the young witch in the light of Draco's wand. Late that night, Draco returned to the cellars, bringing with him a mundane chess game and his Game Boy. "I know you don't have much light, so perhaps chess isn't the best option, but this board does have raised grids, so you don't have to see the squares, and this—" he withdrew the Game Boy from his robe pocket. "This is something that Blaze actually gave to me years ago, but I thought perhaps you would find it more useful. You can use it for a bit of light, but also you can play the game." He showed Luna how the game worked, and even Ollivander seemed mildly interested.
"My wife was muggle-born, you know."
The old man looked away as though seeing old memories.
"She had a couple of great-nieces who are muggles that have things like that. Such an exceptional witch, my wife was. She was beautiful, of course, but what made her special was her magic. It was so pure. Do you know what I mean? We, you children and I, we all grew up around magic. It was the rule, not the exception. Everyone had it. To not have it would be unthinkable. But for her, even near the end, it seemed as though every day would bring a new discovery for her."
Draco's chest felt heavy. He understood exactly what Mr. Ollivander was saying. He felt that way about his own witch.
"How is Hermione?"
Luna asked kindly. "She's all right. She's with Potter. She's safe right now," Draco answered, though he felt a bit odd saying this to someone who was a prisoner in his home.
"Ah, you're in touch with Miss Granger. Vinewood and dragon heartstring. 10 3/4 inches. Purposeful. Unyielding,"
Ollivander said solemnly. "Yes, that sounds about like her." Draco smiled to himself. "Speaking of wands, I have a question to ask you. Hypothetically speaking, if a wand were broken, but the core still intact, the wood snapped, is it possible to repair it?"
I don't think so, not usually. I believe if the wood were merely cracked, it might still give results, though they might not always go true. Rubeus Hagrid's wand was an example of this. His first wand was supposed to be broken after he was accused of introducing a deadly beast into Hogwarts. When he was exonerated, he was offered the chance to get a new wand, but his old wand, though cracked, actually still worked quite well. He showed it to me once. It did have quite a large schism, it seemed, but somehow he was still able to make it work. If you have an exceptional wand, or an exceptional wizard, or both, then you have a world of possibility. But fully broken, that's a scenario in which I'm not as confident."
Draco nodded grimly. He looked up at Mr. Ollivander, lit up by Draco's own wand light, with a perfectly working wand. An unspoken question passed between them. Whose wand, then? But Draco dared not answer. He knew Lord Voldemort might still occasionally question Ollivander. The crazy, dark wizard was looking for something as well, it seemed, based upon a few whispers he'd picked up around the manor this week. And he could not take the chance of Ollivander revealing Potter's secret.
"Can you do me a favour, Draco?"
Luna spoke up from her bed. "Sure, Luna." Nearly anything, he thought. "You're a bloody prisoner in my childhood home."
"Can you not tell Hermione and Harry that you've seen me? They're my friends, and I don't want them to worry. I'm perfectly safe here, and your elves have been quite kind. They've even brought me flowers," she said, gesturing to the small wildflower arrangement, charmed to stay fresh, lying on a low table beside her bed. "Luna, I've kept so many secrets from Hermione, But he looked in her eyes now. "Please, they're my friends, and whatever they're doing is important. I know it must be. If they find out I'm here, they may try to come and help me. Blaise has already said he's going to try and sneak in when he gets back from Italy."
Draco shook his head. Sneaking into Malfoy Manor right now would be a death sentence for anyone. "Please, tell Blaise not to do that. You know who is living here. The wards are incredibly strong. He'd likely be killed before he even got inside the gate."
"I know, I told him that already. Please, remind him of that when you see him."
The blonde witch smiled.
"That's why you can't tell Harry and Hermione, do you understand?"
Damn it. Draco ran his hand through his hair. "Fine," he said, a bit angrily. Back in his room, he sent her a message on his handkerchief. No luck with the wand repair idea. Ollivander thinks it cannot be fixed.
"I was afraid of that."
"I'm going to look tomorrow in the library, here at the manor. We've got a rather extensive collection of text. There's many that Hogwarts doesn't even have, so hopefully I can research a bit here."
"When all of this war stuff is done, I'd like to move into your library for a few months, if that's all right."
"My, when all of this is done, I would love nothing more than for you to own my library." She asked,
"You'd sell me your library?"
He chuckled and wrote back, "I wouldn't need to sell it to you if you were my wife." There was a long pause. during which Draco began to get irrationally nervous that he scared her off. He wrote, "I apologize for being so forward. This whole thing has just made me realize how quickly life can change. Talking with Mr. Ollivander tonight, it made me realize how much I want to be with you, always." She wrote back quickly, "There's no need for an apology. It just surprised me. The realization of it all. I would like that, what you said."
Me too.
Neither of them wrote anything for a moment. Then she wrote, "I'm sorry, you were talking about researching broken wands in your library."
Draco cleared his throat and continued, "Yes. So, I remember a couple of books that used to be in our library. One that discussed wand woods, another that talked about how wands choose their person, you know. I remember reading through them as a child because I was so excited about getting my own wand."
"And you can check them tomorrow?"
"Yes."
"Thank you, Draco. And thank you from Harry, too, for everything. Even if he doesn't know it, you've been a good friend."
"Maybe he won't hex me into oblivion if he finds out about us."
The next morning he hurried to breakfast so that he could get to the library early. Thankfully, it was only him and his mother at the table. Everyone else in the house was having a lie-in for Boxing Day.
"Draco, we've hardly had the chance to talk this entire time you've been home. How is school?"
Draco swallowed his bite and listened a moment to ensure that no one else was joining them. Then he cast a non-verbal muffliato and said, "It's been a very rough year so far. There are lots of things happening that would never have been allowed last year. Professor Snape stays in his office most of the time, so he doesn't see a lot of it, but surely he knows that some of it's happening, at least."
Narcissa looked concerned. "What sorts of things?"
"Just—" He wanted to tell her about the tortures, the crucios, the weird things that Alecto had tried and even done with her male students. But as he looked up, he was suddenly gripped with an unusual fear. It was odd for everyone in the house to be missing breakfast. Usually Pettigrew or Bellatrix joined them. One memorable day last summer, the snake had appeared at a meal with them. Lucius, Narcissa, and Draco had eaten quickly and fearfully in silence that day, and had left hurriedly. He turned suspiciously to his mother. "Why did we go to Belgium when I was 6?
Narcissa stared at him for several long seconds as he looked back at her, hardened walls of occlumency behind his silver eyes. "We were going to the circus in Bruges. We met Igvard, and he introduced you to the hippogriff, Starclaw. You ate fricadelle and chips with mayonnaise, and I got you a stuffed hippogriff named Carlton."
Narcissa spoke all of this with misty eyes. Draco dropped his gaze, then put his face into his hands. His mother had only been expressing concern for him, for the struggles he faced. She wasn't a polyjuiced Death Eater trying to catch him in a betrayal. She wasn't Bellatrix trying to trick him into revealing important or incriminating secrets. She was his mother, and he lived in a state of such constant fear and suspicion that he had assumed her innocent question to be sinister. As he looked up, his eyes spoke all of this to her. Her fearful gaze turned to one of understanding.
"I'm sorry that this is our life, Draco. I never wanted this for any child of mine. My mother was 16 when Grindelwald was defeated, and her stories of that time were quite awful. But this is so much worse. They're living in our home."
At these last words, Narcissa's voice broke, and she had to stop to compose herself. "I know it's not what you wanted for us, Mum," he said. He wished that she had been able to stand up for him more when he was a child, but now he knew the truth better than he had then. The fact of the matter was that Narcissa, in many ways, was little more than a child herself when she had married Lucius and had him. She had been 24 when he was born, married for almost 6 years, and had had at least 4 previous miscarriages. She had gone from her father's house to her husband's house, relying upon their protection and control, never able to think for herself. Perhaps she had not even been willing to think for herself at that age, particularly when her sister had been ostracized so viciously for daring to marry a muggle-born man. And by the time she wanted to think for herself, it was too late. The mold had been cast, the molten silver poured. Her life had been decided for her, and nothing she wished for, and hoped to be different, would be. "How are things going with—" She didn't need to finish the question. Draco knew about what she was asking. He smiled a slow, languid smile in spite of the earlier discussion. "Quite well, actually." She smiled, happy that he at least had learned the lesson of making one's own choices before it was too late. "I need to go to the library to do some research," Draco said, draining the last of his tea and setting the cup down carefully in the saucer. "School project?" He smiled. "Hardly. Just a bit of curiosity about broken wands, and if they can be repaired." Her look of alarm was swift. "Not—" "No, someone else's." She nodded after a moment's contemplation. "Mum," he said before he stood, Do you know who is in the cellars?" I know Ollivander is there. I had hoped, well, back before you learned about... I thought he might have more information," she said. As she locked eyes with him, an image opened in his mind smoothly, that of a sunlit table under a yellow umbrella, a footed glass dish with creamy scoops of ice cream, laden with cream and cherries. It was being sat down upon the table by a tanned hand. From Narcissa's point of view, Draco watched as her eyes travelled up to find warm, dark eyes, a short beard, and dark-coloured hair that didn't quite reach the man's shoulders. The image darkened and faded as the man smiled at Narcissa. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to see—" "It's okay, Mom," Draco said, reddening slightly. "But Ollivander is no longer alone. Did you know?" "Who else is there?" Narcissa asked sharply. "Luna Lovegood." "Pandora's daughter," Narcissa whispered, stricken. Chapter 105. Family Charts. Library Thwarts. Apple Tarts. "Ollivander is no longer alone in the cellar. Did you know?" Draco asked his mother. "Who else is down there?" Narcissa asked sharply. "Luna Lovegood." "Pandora's daughter," Narcissa whispered, stricken. "You know who she is?" Draco asked disbelievingly. "She's your cousin. Your grandmother, Drella, had an aunt who, followed the wrong side. She was a close confidant of Grindelwald. My grandmother, Odelia, was Drella's mother, and she was rather talkative and gossipy in her old age, so I got the full story," Narcissa said, leaning in to share this with Draco. "Odelia, your great-grandmother, had a sister named Vinda. Vinda was... well, she insisted that she was taken advantage of by a muggle-born whilst she was at Beauxbaton, but... according to Odelia, it was actually quite consensual. Vinda was very much in love with the boy, and he with her, but he wasn't ready to be a father. Vinda was already 17, but he still had 2 years of schooling ahead of him. When Vinda fell pregnant, the boy wanted nothing more to do with her. Vinda married a pureblood man named Axel Rogier and gave birth to a half-blood baby boy, Lyndon. But Axel died just a few months after the baby was born. She left the baby with relatives to raise. Incidentally, Odelia also married a Rogier named Hugo.
That was Axel's brother.
So Hugo and Odelia were my great-grandparents, and Lyndon was...
Was your grandmother Druella's first cousin? Lyndon married Adele Bletchley. They had 2 children, Evan and Pandora. Pandora was a few years older than me at Hogwarts. She fell in love with Xenophilius Lovegood. He was good-hearted, but also a bit daft, if I may say so. But his family was full of blood traitors, which Lyndon and Evan did not like. Evan was in your father's organization, you know.
Narcissa gave him a sharp look, and Draco understood. Evan Rosier was a Death Eater.
His mother continued. Evan died soon after the First Wizarding War, resisting auras, if I recall correctly. Pandora died about 7 years or so ago, from some kind of magical accident. But before she died, she had a daughter.
Luna.
Yes. And that's who is downstairs?
His mother asked quietly, sadly. Yes. She's dating a friend of mine. You remember Blaise Zabini?
Of course.
I offered to get her out of here. If not breaking her out, then using Pym, perhaps, but she said she's all right. She thinks if I do that, we could all be killed.
Narcissa sighed. Unfortunately, she's probably right.
She paused, considering.
I will make sure she is taken care of. Unfortunately, I cannot send word to her father. All of our owl correspondence is being read by them.
There was no need to explain to Draco who this them was. The library was cold and dark this early in the morning. After warding the doors, Draco lit as many torches and lamps as he could find, setting a warming fire in the fireplace opposite the green velvet-tufted sofa that sat in pride of place in the room. He had a feeling that he was going to be here a while, considering how large the collection was at Malfoy Manor. But it turned out he was entirely wrong. He asked the room for his first search request. Wand repair. Nothing appeared. He tried again. Wand making. Nothing. Wand history. 0. Draco huffed. What the hell was wrong? Maybe a control test. Werewolves. In an instant, no fewer than 50 books sailed towards him, stacking themselves neatly on the low table in front of the sofa. He tried again, going broader this time. Wands. Nothing. A magical library with tens of thousands of titles, and not a single book about magic wands. He dug in his trouser pocket. His only coins left were Snape and his mother. Draco decided to try Narcissa. Perhaps she knew what was wrong with the library. Trying to find wand books in library, but there are none. She responded quickly.
Give me a minute. Open the wards.
He did so. Less than a minute later, the library doors opened, and his mother stepped through. They resealed the wards together.
What do you mean, there's no books on wands? I just purchased a book less than a month ago. It was called Beyond the Wand, Using Wandless Magic Discreetly in the Muggle World.
Search for it, Draco challenged her. Narcissa called out the author's name, the title, even the publishing date. The book was not there. She tried 2 or 3 other titles she knew should be there, but weren't.
I'm fairly certain it's you-know-who.
What is? Draco asked.
You know he's searching for something. I think he's trying to find a better wand, a different one. I think it's the reason Ollivander is still alive, so that he can question him, and why all of the books on that particular subject are gone. Remember this summer, he demanded your father's wand and broke it. I think he's still looking for the right one.
This made sense. Hermione had told him once that the Dark Lords and Potter's wands shared a core of phoenix feather. If the two of them kept going up against each other, and Potter kept escaping Lord Voldemort where so many others before him had not, it stood to reason that Voldemort would be looking for something that could be blamed. He might believe that getting a better, more powerful wand was the key to getting rid of Potter once and for all. If Lord Voldemort found out that Potter's wand was broken, shit, things could go from bad to much, much worse very quickly. Draco sincerely hoped that this theory of a new wand search wasn't the case. He recalled a section in History of Magic years before on wands. Apparently, early wizarding folk had to search out their own wands, using primitive magic to bind the cores. Later, a few powerful wands with names like Deathstick and Wand of Destiny were said to have been created, leading to wizards searching for skilled wand makers to try and emulate those results. Perhaps this was the kind of wand the Dark Lord was seeking. Draco hoped that he was unsuccessful. It was good, in a way, that Hermione had refused his own wand when he offered it to her. As powerful as unicorn hair was as a wand core, one area those wands often struggled with was dark magic. Dragon heartstring, such as Hermione's wand, had a much more likely chance of defeating Voldemort than unicorn hair, Draco thought. Still, he would have felt safer for her if she'd taken it. 2 wands were certainly better than 1. Narcissa interrupted his thoughts, asking, "Would you like to go over to Andrew's today? Tonks and Remus have decided to move in with her permanently. What with Ted on the run and the baby on the way, they felt safer, and warding 2 houses was unnecessary. Our guests shouldn't miss us. Everyone is sleeping off their Yuletide celebrations." "Yes, let's," Draco murmured, wondering how Professor Lupin was going to react to his presence. The last time they saw each other, Draco was a right little shit who hadn't hesitated to make smarmy, rude comments about the professor's clothes, his luggage, his teaching methods, and everything else. He thanked his mother and set off to the stairs to his wing. As soon as his room wards were resealed, he took out his handkerchief and sent her a message. "I tried to find books about wands or wand repair in the library, but they aren't there. They're all gone." A few minutes later she replied, "You mean they're missing, or someone took them?" "Mom thinks he's reading them. Maybe because his and Potter's wand cores are similar. He thinks he needs a better wand. You know, he used a different wand when Potter was fleeing his muggle house."
"Right, you mentioned that. That's really interesting."
"I could try to get in touch with another friend whose library is close in size to ours, but most families don't have as extensive a collection, and certainly not as large a collection of books about darker magic. Theo Knotts might be the only one that comes close, and he hasn't been back to his house since summer before 5th year. I'm not sure he will ever set foot in that house again."
"It is surprising that so many families wouldn't have a large library. I mean, you're talking about generations of people collecting books, and it's simple enough to enlarge a space to fit them."
Draco considered this, then replied, "Yes, but between wars and fires and such, I wouldn't be surprised if several have been destroyed over the centuries."
She wrote back, "A bit odd that pureblood libraries wouldn't have precautions in place for fire. It seems a simple enough thing to control and stop."
"Yes, mundane fire, certainly, but there are forms of magical fire, too. Some can be harnessed, like fairy fire, but others, particularly dark magic fires, like fiend fire, or in some cases hell fire, those will destroy everything in its path."
Fiend fire destroys everything, you say?"
"Hermione, please do not get any wild ideas. I know you need to destroy things, but fiend fire isn't like your bluebell flames. once conjured, they're nearly impossible to control. Don't get any ideas. If you had set Snape's robes on fire with fiend fire, you'd have killed half of Hogwarts." There was a very pregnant pause. Then she answered, "How did you know I set Snape's robes on fire?" "Merlin Witch, even at 11 years old I could barely take my eyes off of you. I saw everything." Another long pause. Then she answered, "That's embarrassing." You were adorable." "I love you, Draco." "Love you too, my." Professor Lupin answered the door when Draco and his mother arrived at Andromeda's house. He bowed slightly to Narcissa, then shook Draco's hand once they were inside. "Happy Christmas to you, Mr. Lupin," Narcissa said warmly. "And to you as well, Mrs. Malfoy. And please, call me Remus." Narcissa asked the same of him. The professor smiled, and Draco had to admit that he looked far better than he had at Hogwarts. Married life suited him well. His clothes and hair looked far less shabby than they had before, and he looked much less gaunt and drawn. "Dora and her mother are just in the living room," Lupin said. "I'm just finishing up an apple tart in the kitchen. Perhaps you can help me, Draco." Lupin looked him in the eye, and Draco could tell that the man had more on his mind than baking. "Of course," he said smoothly, following his former teacher into the kitchen, whilst his mother turned into the living room to greet her sister and niece. When they reached the kitchen, Draco was surprised to find several muggle appliances, but then he recalled that Ted was a muggle-born wizard. "I'm afraid these ovens confound me a bit. Andry has a magical stove as well, but she asked me to make Ted's apple tart. The recipe very specifically states that it needs to be made in a muggle oven, otherwise the crumble doesn't crisp properly. But it takes so long to reach the proper temperature," Lupin said, moving about the kitchen to clean up some of his ingredients. "I only need to mix the ingredients for the crumble for the top. Can you pass me that butter?" Perhaps he did only want to talk about baking. But just as Draco was settling himself against the countertop to watch the process, Lupin began speaking again. "I wished to thank you for all of your help with Dora and her father. Not only, of course, your help when she was injured, but also all the other times, getting her safely to and from the shack." Lupin opened the oven and spread the crumb mixture on top of the tart. "It was the least I could do, and besides, I rather enjoyed it. I've never had a cousin before, and turns out now that I've gotten to meet 2 this year. Well, nearly 3, once the baby is born." Lupin smiled a bit, then asked bemusedly, 3? "I've recently learned that Luna Lovegood is also a cousin of mine." "Ah, yes. Pandora was a 7th year, my first year in school. Zeno had already graduated, but I always heard that he was quite a character." "Well, I suppose he still is." The 2 wizards shared a slight chuckle, thinking of all the unusual stories that came from the Quibbler's pages. I also wished to speak to you about Dumbledore," Lupin said quietly as he closed the oven door. Draco cast his eyes downward. He knew they would get there eventually. "I understand that you were in a tough predicament. I've spoken with Hermione, and I understand the difficult position you were in last year." I wish it could have been different," Draco murmured. There was not a lot that he could say. I wish a lot of things could have been different, actually. "Don't we all?" Lupin answered distractedly, looking out of the window and scratching unconsciously at his throat. Draco had a feeling that the things Lupin would change stretched back much further than the things Draco had in mind. "Still, there's always the future. And to be honest with you, if changing the past meant changing the future, I wouldn't do it. In spite of all of the bad things that have happened, too much good has come from it."
Lupin smiled then, and Draco was a bit awestruck at the man's ability to find positivity in life, despite all the bad things that had happened to him. But then Draco leaned his head back against the cabinet and truly thought about Lupin's words. Would he change the past if it meant that the future would be changed as well? In some regards, perhaps. If he could go back and kill Voldemort, perhaps. But what if someone else, Bellatrix, stood in his place? If he went back and stopped his parents from marrying, encouraging his mother to follow her happiness with Fortescue, he wouldn't even be here. If he went back and told his 11-year-old self that Hermione Granger would grow up to be his girlfriend, that little twit would have probably done everything he could to avoid that. Lupin was right. Too many good things had come from the past to regret it too much. I just want to apologize. To you. To the rest of the Order. It is a little consolation, but you should know that things were not entirely as they seemed. Lupin looked up at him sharply. Dumbledore is still dead. It was a statement, and yet Draco recognized the minuscule bit of unreasonable hope in the words the man spoke. He is, Draco said firmly. But if I told you there was more to it than what actually happened, well, I can't say more. I promised. But please understand, there was more happening than even I understood at the time. Draco remembered his promise to Snape not to tell the full truth of what happened that night. He knew that this was mainly in regards to Potter, but he had to assume this meant the entire Order. Lupin looked into Draco's eyes again, and Draco did not use his occlumency, but it was clear that Lupin had never learned legilimency. After a moment, the older man sighed. You've proven yourself in other ways, more often than not. Kingsley told me about your part in moving Harry, and in the Ministry takeover. And Hermione and my own family have told me enough things to know what kind of man you are. So, in this, I will have to trust you, and take you at your word. There was a small bell noise, and Lupin turned to the oven. Ah! The recipe was correct. The crumble came out perfectly. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.